Good morning and welcome to Fox 29's News Now on this beautiful Wednesday morning. The primary results are in and candidates are now turning their focus to the general election in November in Pennsylvania. Let's break down some of the key races. Starting with the race for Philadelphia mayor, Jim Kenney, the incumbent, came out on top with about 67% of the vote. Anthony Williams had 24%, and Alan Buckowitz had under 10%. Kenney will take on Republican attorney Billy Chancelini in the general election on November 5th.
Every single one of them in this city that gets up, says things that are offensive, racist, and bigoted should be fired. How are you going to serve the community if they don't?
In an upset win, Democrat Rochelle Bilal beat out two-term Sheriff Jewel Williams. Two former sheriff's deputies also sought the Democratic nomination for sheriff. There is no Republican candidate running. And another upset in Pennsylvania's primary, six-term city councilwoman Janine Blackwell has lost her re-election bid. Jamie Gauthier, on the right of your screen, is the former executive director of the Fairmount Park Conservancy, and she won the Democratic primary in District 3. Her win marks the first time in 45 years that a member of the Blackwell family isn't elected in the district. And it's the end of an era for former Deputy City Commissioner Tracy Gordon. Not for her, rather, she defeated the Register of Wills Ron Donatucci in the Democratic primary, shutting down his bid for an 11th term in the office. Donatucci has been the Register of Wills since 1980. And in Lehigh County, Allentown's interim mayor has won the Democratic primary as he seeks to replace imprisoned former Mayor Ed Pawlowski. Ray O'Connell winning the primary over three other challengers. He will face Tim Ramos in the general election to determine who will serve the final 2 years of Pawlowski's term. Pawlowski was sentenced to 15 years in prison after being convicted on federal corruption charges. And in local news this morning, a Philadelphia detective is now on desk duty after shooting a panhandler who he believed had a gun. No gun was found, and police have released surveillance video showing the shooting in Kensington. We want to warn you, the video you are about to see may be hard to watch. The video shows 28-year-old Joel Johnson walking along a line of cars, stopped at a light on G Street. Suddenly, you can see gunfire and smoke pour out of a car. Johnson drops to the ground, and neighbors say Johnson has a mental disability and often walks around panhandling. The detective told investigators he thought Johnson was holding a gun and was about to rob him, but that wasn't the case. And more in local news this morning. In Newcastle County, thieves are smashing car windows trying to steal whatever they can from inside. Many of the vehicles were locked, but it's not stopping those up to no good. Fox 29's Lauren Johnson has the latest.
Hey, good morning to both of you. So you would think that maybe you are off limits if you don't have some high-profile car. Not the case at all. It seems anybody is on limits here in Delaware County, where these thieves are looking cars, trucks, back seats, trunks, glove boxes, everything, because they are on some sort of spree. All the victims have been within a half mile of each other at schools, malls, and hotels. Police say at least 7 victims were targeted at Christiana Mall, Delaware Technical College, and several hotels and and motels. In all of these cases, the crooks are not going for the easy target to leave valuables in plain sight or the doors unlocked. In this recent rash, they're even smashing their way into locked cars, then going through all of the stuff in your vehicle, hoping to find something valuable when it's all over.
We saw the bag. Yeah. We saw the open window. Yeah. Police say you shouldn't do that. Yeah, that's a no-no.
Yeah, you definitely shouldn't. And the funny thing is, like, right before I started talking to you, I rolled my window up. I noticed how low I had it. I definitely want to lock my stuff up now. Definitely give my coworkers the heads up just to be on the guard. And any customers that come in, let them know as well.
And we're letting you know an investigation's underway by the Delaware State Police. They are trying to find out who's behind the crimes that can really become expensive to victims. But investigators also have a few tips for you. Your car title, never have that in your car ever. But you can leave your registration and your insurance documents locked in your glove box. No valuables in plain sight. Sounds like common sense, but our cameras caught a lot of that happening yesterday. Lock your doors, make sure your windows are all the way up. Nothing is too big or too small to ignore. Even like this car, you might have an innocent bag on your back seat. Could be your workout clothes, your luggage for a work trip. It could be confused with something worth a lot of money to these guys. So the warning this morning from Delaware State Police: make sure you are safe so you don't become a target if possible. Also, if you think that something's happened to your car or you may have seen something in the last few days or weeks, you're asked to call them as well.
And in political news this morning, more Democrats are calling, and more loudly, for impeachment proceedings against President Donald Trump after his latest defiance of Congress by blocking his former White House lawyer from testifying. Fox's Doug Luzader has the story this morning from Washington.
Well, there's a big meeting in about 2 hours down in Washington, D.C., where House Democrats, some of them, could decide whether to attempt to remove President Trump from office. Again, the meeting's supposed to take place about 9 o'clock.
And this is interesting, Doug, because there have been talks about trying to make this happen, but it seems like this is a step.
Yeah, look, and we know there's a divide within the party, so we'll see the degree to which they're able to kind of, stitch over that. But this is behind closed doors today. What happens inside, though, is going to echo across Capitol Hill.
I extend to you this gavel.
The Speaker's gavel has rarely been heavier. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is in a tough spot today, even if she plays it down.
Madam Speaker, are you under increased pressure to impeach the president from your caucus?
No. And she says no, but she is under pressure from many in her own caucus to begin impeachment proceedings against the president. And as she meets with all House Democrats this morning, she will get an earful, especially after former White House counsel Don McGahn was a no-show for a hearing yesterday to investigate whether the president obstructed justice. And some are resolute.
The President of the United States of America needs to be impeached.
But there are other Democrats who are much more cautious, like California's Katie Hill, calling for investigations instead.
And hopefully it shows that we don't need to go down the path of impeachment.
Katie Hill represents the people who come from swing districts, who are probably at risk if they're seen as going too far toward impeachment. Maxine Waters and the others who are pro-impeachment come from pure blue districts where they're getting the pressure from the other side. Why are you taking so long to impeach him?
Are you worried about impeachment, Mr. President?
But would an impeachment proceeding actually help President Trump? Our recent Fox News poll shows a big voter divide, with just 42% supporting impeachment.
And that's what gives folks like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi pause on pursuing impeachment. Meantime, there's going to be kind of an awkward moment today, we think, because right after this big meeting on impeachment, and Pelosi is headed over to the White House to talk directly with the president about a completely different subject, about infrastructure spending.
Politicians are so weird. They can just be screaming at each other.
Would you turn on a dime?
Yeah. Very nice job today. I'm going to send a treat to you today. I'm going to a box of Oreos.
You say Oreo or Oreo?
No, Oreos.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, yeah, sure.
And in business news this morning, Chevy is making teens buckle up whether they would like to or not. The car company announced that a new feature for their teen mode would force teenagers to buckle up. Fox Business reporter Tracy Crasco joined Good Day with more.
In case you didn't know what Chevrolet is, it's a car company, announced that a new feature is going to be what they call, that you can put the car into teen mode.
So Tracy, explain this. How is it going to really get the teen to put on their seatbelt?
Yes, this is a new feature that Chevy is rolling out. As you said, it's in the teen driver mode. This feature is called Buckle to Drive. So essentially, the car will not shift out of park for at least 20 seconds until it recognizes that the driver is buckled up. So this is all part of something that Chevrolet has done to make teen drivers safer. So this will be available in the new 2020 models of the Chevy Traverse, Malibu, and Colorado, the teen driver mode. It also allows parents to make sure that it will mute the radio until the driver and front passenger seatbelts are fastened. Also allows parents to set maximum speed limits. So all of these things to keep drivers safer, teen drivers safer, and everyone else on the road as well, because teen drivers, 41% of them admit to not buckling up.
Well, it would frustrate me if my car wouldn't come out of park for 20 seconds.
Right.
I'd slap on that belt immediately, which I do anyway.
And you know, some cars now, they do the beeping.
Yeah, beeping.
Until you do it, but I guess that's not enough, so you got to take it to another step.
It's just...
People, I think, work around the beeping. So I
Yeah.
think if you can't even get the car out of park,
Oh,
then,
right. That'll
then
force
you can't go anywhere.
Because I've been in a car with a person before who we were going, and I'm like, listen, do you not hear that sound? Like, can you stop it, please? Put on your seatbelt. They can just keep driving, and they don't even hear it.
I've experienced that too. I experienced that in an Uber. Or guy,
really?
Will you just buckle your? You really? You drive around all day with that pinging? Oh, do you buckle up when you get in an Uber in the back seat, Tracy? Come on.
I do.
I do too.
Sometimes. There are times when I don't, but for the most part, I do try to, because you've been on the streets here in New York. It
Oh my
can get
God.
pretty wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people don't do it in cabs.
Because a lot of cabs still don't have them,
Yeah.
don't they? Do they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, some of them do,
yeah,
but
they're there.
I don't do it in cabs either. Yeah.
Yeah, it is weird, isn't it?
Something about a
It is
cab that
weird.
people don't. But
Something about a cab. Hey,
Maybe they're just a little gross.
Oh, that's for sure. Okay, here's what I'm going just quickly. You ever get out of a cab and without paying because you thought you were in an Uber? I've done that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they go, hey, where are you going?
Like, oh, sorry. Forgot.
Tracy, we'll see you tomorrow.
Moving on to your Fox 29 Weather Authority. The Philadelphia area is slated for another warm and sunny day Wednesday. Temperatures will reach a high of 76 degrees with a mix of clouds and sunshine. Rain is expected to return to the forecast tomorrow with a few afternoon thunderstorms possible. And through Sunday, we'll see temperatures start to increase. By Sunday, they'll rise to nearly 90 degrees. And here's a look at current temperatures in our area. 59 degrees in Mount Pocono, 66 in Lancaster, 67 in Toms River, a degree higher in Atlantic City and Wildwood, and the same here in Philadelphia. And looking ahead to our 7-day forecast, again, not much to complain about this Wednesday. 76, nice and sunny, and temperatures will start to rise Thursday, Friday, Saturday, up until nearly the 90-degree mark by Sunday. And things will cool down by the time the Phillies come back home on Tuesday. And don't forget to download the latest version of the Fox 29 Weather Authority app to have the latest forecast right at your fingertips. Back to local news this morning in Hunting Park. Still no arrest in the shooting that left a 24-year-old man dead. Police say it happened just after midnight on North Franklin Street. The man was shot several times in the chest and transported to Temple University Hospital, but he did not survive. And in Burlington County, a grand jury has indicted 2 parents in the 2018 murder of their baby boy. Police say 42-year-old William Herring and 22-year-old Brianna Brochhausen were living in a Springfield Township motel last February when their son Hunter wouldn't stop crying. They told police they put the 4-month-old in timeout by putting him under a comforter for 10 minutes while they went out for a smoke. When they came back, he wasn't breathing. Doctors took him off life support less than a month later. And in Montgomery County, police are searching for whoever stole a donation jar that was meant to help sick children. It happened at the Dairy Queen on the 2600 block of Ridge Avenue in Lower Providence. 2 women and 1 man were seen swiping a jar off the counter. The money inside was meant to help the Children's Miracle Network.
It's dreadful. I mean, you can't even trust anyone anymore, and you try to do something good and it's ruined in just a moment.
It's heartbreaking. I would never think of such thing, that somebody can do such thing.
The thieves got away with about $60. If you recognize any of them, police want to hear from you. And in Atlantic County, a state appellate court says 5 cocktail waitresses who sued the Borgata Casino for gender bias and a hostile work environment can take their case to trial. The women initially sued the casino in 2008, claiming the dress code for the Borgata babes created a culture of humiliation and harassment. A trial court dismissed the case, and it's been through 2 appeals. The Borgata declined comment on the ruling. And in Pennsylvania, there is a critical need for volunteer firefighters. More than 100 men and women in Bucks County are answering that call. A ceremony was held at Bucks County Community College in Newtown yesterday for graduates who completed their public safety training and certification program to become volunteer firefighters. The graduates trained for months and say it's all about giving back. Their families are indeed proud.
He's very excited for tonight. He worked hard for this.
I'm a volunteer fire police for Hanlico Station 33 up in the valley, and him graduating from Fire Academy today is a great thing.
A total of 120 people finished the program. They'll now move on to their assigned fire department. And new research shows that most deaths among young kids playing sports are cardiac related. A man who is using his own loss to ensure no more children die from undetected heart conditions joined Good Day this morning to discuss.
A new study shows most youth who die from cardiac arrest while playing sports are in, middle school.
Darren Subman is working to prevent this. His son Simon passed away in 2004 when he was just a few months old to an undetected but treatable heart condition. Simon's Fund, now known as Simon's Heart, helps raise awareness to conditions like Simon's through screening and education.
And Darren is here. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
You've been doing a lot of good work in this 14 years since you lost Simon. So what exactly happened? You put him down for a nap and he never woke up?
Exactly. He was seemingly healthy. He was average for all the measurements, and he just didn't wake up. And after he passed, we were told to get our hearts checked because babies just don't die.
You and Mom?
Me and Mom, yep.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, Phyllis was diagnosed with a heart condition that has been linked to SIDS death, sudden infant death syndrome, as well as one of the conditions that can cause these student athletes that they're talking about in this report to die.
And that's when you came to realize, hey, a lot of people may not know when they have a heart condition.
Correct. It's pretty amazing that the heart, which will beat about 2 billion times during our lifetime, goes unchecked until we reach middle age. We don't do that with our cars or our air conditioning units, so hopefully we'll start to get a little bit smarter and not take them for granted.
And we're kind of lucky here in Pennsylvania because there has been a law that was passed, right, and that, at least for student athletes, gets them to be checked before they step out in the field.
So the law that was passed in 2012, the Sudden Cardiac Arrest Prevention Act, requires parents and coaches and students to become aware of it, sign a form, and then coaches have to be trained for it. It doesn't require testing.
Oh, so just saying, hey, this could be a possibility?
Yes, in the packet that student athletes get that they have to read and fill out, there's a sheet on sudden cardiac arrest and the warning signs and symptoms.
So, with Simon, I mean, a doctor checked him when he was born, right?
Correct, correct.
But it wasn't detected.
It was not detected because we don't look for that when babies are born. They get about 49 genetic tests for the prick, and then they have their pulse ox tested, which can suggest that there might be some lower level of oxygen that could lead to a heart problem. But we don't do anything beyond that until, like I said, you're applying for life insurance, or you get to be old like me and you want a more thorough checkup.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm so old. I don't ever remember any checkups to play baseball when I was a kid, or even football in high school, getting a checkup.
Yeah, it's not that thorough, and hopefully that's something that we can change.
Any thoughts on why it might be for the middle school as opposed to high school? Is it affecting them more with this new information that we have?
So we definitely need more research in this area, which is why it's so important to do heart screenings. That's one thing that Simon's Heart does, is provide free heart screenings. Because unless we are out there checking kids' hearts and finding out what's seemingly normal and not, then we're not going to know. But the experts believe that it's when they're going into puberty, because the heart tends to change and develop pretty drastically until you reach
and
there's a lot of changes.
Pretty much all sports, right?
But there's one in particular that seems to have more incidents.
Well, basketball.
Basketball.
You'd think maybe it'd be, well, no, basketball can get pretty tough.
Maybe, I don't.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
Basketball takes a lot on the
35%.
Wow.
Compared to the other sports, which is just in the teens.
How can everyday viewers help you?
There's actually a couple ways. We do heart screenings around the Philadelphia area. There's also groups around the country that do them. Visit our website, simonsheart.org. Bring your child to a heart screening. Make sure there's an AED device where your kids learn and play, an automatic external defibrillator, because that's the only tool that can save someone in cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
And if you don't have one, you're just going to have to wait for a first responder, and that might be too late.
Most schools have them now?
A lot of schools have them, not all do. But a lot of places where our kids learn and play do not.
Yeah, yeah. We got one right outside the studio.
You do.
You walked in. And you see them in airports now and all that. Thanks for your good work.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Okay. All right.
And more on Good Day this morning. The discovery of handwritten wills in the home of the late, great Aretha Franklin could ignite a dispute among family members about the estate of the Queen of Soul. She died last August without a formal document to guide her sons about her music, property, and other assets. But the newly found writings filed in court Monday could change everything. We discussed on Good Day this morning.
All right, let's talk about Aretha.
Well, when Aretha Franklin died in August of 2018, it was originally thought that she died without a will.
No. They've been found. 3 wills have been discovered in her home that she wrote herself, handwritten.
So now we're going to bring in attorney Jennifer Brandt to answer what happens next, and what do you do when you have 3 different wills? How do you know which one you're going to follow?
Well, usually you would follow the most recent one, and there was one there from 2014 that was found in her couch cushions. It was written in a spiral notebook. 2 others were found in a locked cabinet from 2010. But because these wills were handwritten, they have numerous cross-outs. She apparently did this herself without the assistance of a lawyer, and we don't know if it's actually even her handwriting, and the fact that they're found at this late date, they're being contested in court.
Well, they'll be able to figure out if that's her handwriting.
Yes,
Just bring in a handwriting expert.
Exactly.
Well, so how do you think this is going to work out in court?
Well, I don't know. It really depends on how much. She has 4 sons, so it depends on how much they're really going to contest these and who else might come about.
Did she give money in this handwritten will and any to all 4?
Yeah, it seems that she was pretty clear about distributing her assets and make sure that her sons would receive her assets. Her oldest son has special needs, which a lot of people didn't know, so she made special provisions for him, different than the other 3. And she also made some provisions for, I believe, some of her nieces and grandchildren. So it seems like she She did take care of a lot of people, although it's questionable whether she distributed her entire estate, and that'll be an issue as well.
I don't know how rare this would be for people her age. You know what I mean? A mistrust of the system and things like that.
It's so unusual because obviously she was a celebrity. She had numerous lawyers and accountants and advisors to help her. So it's strange that she would draft these wills herself.
But she was known for doing things her way. Like, you know, she would go perform, no air conditioning. She didn't like to fly. She'd always
cash.
Yeah,
so she was very strong-willed.
And in the wills, she even criticized, I believe, some of her advisors and says, you know, things about them that, you know, make one believe that maybe she did really want to do this herself.
Yeah, maybe she didn't trust them. So what's the best way then if you're putting together? Well, I have to admit, my parents have been on me. They say that I should go ahead and start, which I was like,
all right, let's talk to our viewers. Now, be honest. Do you have a will? I bet a lot of people are going, no.
And what's the proper way? Or even you might think you have a will, but is it done correctly?
Well, you hit on the topic of, you know, the top thing, that you should have a will. You know, you need to make a will. And if you are going to make a will, you should have a lawyer draft it. It's really not worth it to try to do it yourself, even though you can. You should dispose of all of your assets. You need to let people know where your will is. You don't want to be like Aretha finding it.
Does it need to be notarized?
It should be notarized and witnessed. That makes it more official. It's not necessary, as we can see here with Aretha, but it's a good idea. You want to provide for your kids, give a guardian for your kids, and dispose of all of your assets. That's also very important.
What do you think of the percentages of people that have wills?
I think.
At what age should you have one?
Usually,
5?
What I tell people, what I tell clients is that oftentimes once you have children, maybe once you get married, once you have some assets to dispose of, then it may be a good idea to get a will. You don't have to have a lot to have a will. You just want to be able to direct where your assets go when you die. So it's really a good idea for everybody.
I'm leaving anything that I might have left to you.
Are you?
Yeah.
What am I, chopped liver?
No.
Thanks,
I give
Mike.
you a piece of me every day.
Oh,
You know what I
is
mean?
that what it is?
My soul.
And that's priceless.
That's right. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We're going to take you now to Washington, where the House Financial Services Committee is holding a hearing where Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin is testifying in Washington. Stay with us.
Appreciate your concerns. Let me just say what we're focused on is the U.S. subsidiary.
I understand. You're claiming my time. I understand. Could you respond specifically to how the hell do you lose $3 billion and not see that coming?
Well, I hate to say it, there were a lot of people that lost $3 billion and didn't see it coming.
We don't want to repeat that, you would agree.
We surely don't. I can tell you I am familiar with some of their really bad investments, and I find it hard to believe that they made them. But yes, it's a staggering amount of money we would agree on.
And Deutsche Bank has failed its stress test in 3 of the last 4 years, was fined for a mirror trading scandal involving laundering with Russian oligarchs, admitted to participating in a LIBOR interest rate scandal, and violated U.S. sanctions against Iran, Libya, Syria, and the Sudan. Most recently, it came to light that Deutsche Bank had willfully decided to ignore suspicious activity reports, SARS, with regard to the president and his son-in-law. What is your plan to hold Deutsche Bank responsible for failing to do appropriate oversight and respond to the regulatory controls that are in place with regard to SARS?
Well, let me just say the SAR issue I did read in the paper. I am going to have FinCEN follow up and make sure that Deutsche Bank, as anyone else, has SARS policies that are on everyone. So I'm not aware of whether this is true or not true, but we will have FinCEN follow up. I go back to our obligation of U.S. regulators.
Would you be willing to respond back to this committee as to whether that did or did not in fact occur?
I understand that we can't comment publicly on SARS, but we will follow back with the committee to make sure that we have done a compliance oversight, and whatever the result is, we are comfortable with.
Are you planning to ask the German banking authority to also do additional oversight of Deutsche Bank, especially given that we now regulate them much less than we used to?
Well, again, the U.S. entity, we will regulate considerably. So the U.S. entity with intermediary holding companies, we will be comfortable that the U.S. company doesn't jeopardize the U.S. financial system. In my conversations with the Europeans, yes, I will speak to them and make sure that they are properly regulating the parent entity, and I know the Germans share our concerns.
I wanted to ask you about FSOC's hedge fund working group. I had a conversation with Mr. Powell about that. FSOC's last annual reports in 2017 and 2018 included in each report 400 words about the 9,000 hedge funds registered in the United States, which collectively have $4 trillion in net asset value. That is $10 billion in asset risk per word of analysis from FSOC. And those words are, the Council recommends that relevant agencies continue to review their data collections and assess whether they are sufficient to allow the Council to monitor whether and how private funds may pose risk to financial stability. Why is FSOC just copying and pasting the same recommendations on hedge funds in 2017 and 2018? Do you not have enough staff at FSOC to prepare updated content? The last product to come out of the FSOC working group was in 2016. You're repasting the same financial recommendations even as the markets are changing and the risks that hedge funds facing are changing. In the 2019 report, will I see that identical 400-word content, or is the working group going to do some work and mix it up a little?
I very much appreciate your comment. I acknowledge that that's a lot of assets per word. We have talked about hedge funds. I believe you're right. This doesn't reflect, and we should not be copying and pasting, and we will update that appropriately. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, Madam Leader. And I have a few questions regarding debt distress, which is quickly rising in Africa and Latin America. I come from the great state of Texas, and I represent one of the border districts that we're dealing with the grave refugee situation on our border, and we're really concerned about Central American countries. And the fueled by opaque loans from China, many lending institutions, especially those associated with China's Belt and Road Initiative, China has shown little interest in joining established multilateral mechanisms to coordinate forces on bilateral debt, let alone write them down if needed, as a major advanced economies have done for years. How likely is it that these countries are heading for a debt crisis, and how difficult will it be to resolve one if it happens?
I share your concerns. I've made some comments already, but I'll repeat them, which is we are very much working with our allies at the G7 and the G20 on this issue. We very much support debt transparency, and if China wants to lend, they should lend on the basis of everyone else with debt transparency. We're encouraging them to join the Paris Club. I think that would be important. We're working through the IMF and World Bank. So this is an issue. I share your concerns and is very topical and timely.
What are we doing with the IMF in order to have them pressure China to adopt global norms and practices? Are we doing something in that regard?
We are at both the IMF and the World Bank, where my previous Undersecretary, David Malpass, this is one of his big priorities. And I've personally had conversations with the governor of the People's Bank and other senior people there on debt transparency. So this is the French are leading an effort on this. There's a lot of unity on this issue.
I'm concerned, internationally, but particularly in Latin America, as my district is impacted directly. Do these developing countries have tools, including internal governance systems, that will enable them to appropriately evaluate the wisdom of the China Belt and Road Initiative and other projects? And if not, what are we doing to try to engage that issue in itself?
Well, this is an important area of Treasury where we provide technical assistance. And this is a specific area where I think without spending a lot of money, it's very, very impactful working with these governments that they understand what they're taking on. And, without me saying a specific country, I can tell you right now, as part of an IMF program that we are contemplating, as part of that, there have been discussions about debt repayments and everything else. So I can assure you this is a timely topic that this administration is highly focused on, so I appreciate your focus on this.
What is the IMF trying to do behind the scenes to get China to come clean on its Belt and Road Initiative? Are they doing anything?
Well, again, I don't like to use the word come clean, because to the extent they genuinely want to lend, that's fine. But what they are insisting, particularly where there are IMF programs, and China is a lender, that the IMF, as part of its program, has full transparency into the sustainability of China payments. And we will not be approving IMF programs without having that going forward.
So is the Treasury engaging these countries and kind of educating them on the risks of taking these Chinese loans?
Absolutely. And as I said, the current president of the World Bank, who has worked for us, is taking this on as a major issue for the World Bank and his leadership.
Thank you. I yield back.
Unanimous consent to yield to myself 5 minutes. I'd like to ask a few questions.
Reserving the right to object. 5 minutes for both the ranking member and the chair?
That is absolutely correct.
All right.
What I intended to do was to yield to you also.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, the law does not allow the Secretary to exercise discretion in disclosing the information provided the statutory conditions are met. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
I believe, subject to the Constitution of the United States, that is correct.
Okay. There was information released last evening, I think in the Washington Post, and the memo states the Secretary's obligation to disclose, return information would not be affected by the failure of a tax writing committee to state a reason for the request. Is that following? And the only basis the agency's refusal to comply with the committee's subpoena would be the invocation of the doctrine of executive privilege. Is that correct?
Let me just comment. I have no idea. I just saw that memo this morning. I've never seen that before. I don't know who wrote that memo. We will try to get to the bottom of it. As I've commented before, we will read the memo, and if it has any new information, but I can't comment on the memo. I just saw it today. I don't even know if it's genuine or someone made it up.
Let me just, since you did not see it, let me ask a few other questions. Did you discuss the memo with the President of the United States?
I've had no discussions with the President or anybody in the White House about releasing the President's
Did you have a discussion with anybody outside of the White House about this?
The Department of Justice, who is our lawyer in potential litigation, and we rely upon for interpretations of constitutional law.
I guess I want to make clear that you never discussed this memorandum with anybody inside or outside of the White House. Is that correct?
I have not heard of or seen that memo, okay?
My question is discuss. Did you discuss the memorandum with anybody inside the White House, outside the White House? I'm referring to legal counsel, I'm referring to lawyers, I'm referring to advisors.
Let me be clear. The only person I've discussed that memo with is my general counsel on the car ride over here who's sitting behind me. I have not discussed that memo. Oh, and actually I did ask the commissioner whether he had seen that memo, and he had not. But
my question is prior to
no, let me
the
be
first
clear.
time that you say you saw it.
No, I have not
was
discussed it.
This morning, is that it?
We received an inquiry from the Washington Post, I believe 2 days ago, about a supposed memo, and the first time I saw it was in the car ride over here.
Okay, the Treasury says it is following a legal analysis from the Justice Department, but the analysis has not been released. You have that analysis?
We have a conclusion, and as soon as the Justice Department, which we've asked them to work on expeditiously, has the full memo, it will be released publicly to you and to others.
Yeah,
that is
I would like to, as quickly as possible, get a copy of the analysis as soon as it's released.
I will assure that's the case. We are working with DOJ, and I want to get it released quickly.
Thank you. I just wanted to take this moment to allow you to modify, to change, to expound, to do whatever was necessary to make sure that you were comfortable with your statement about never having seen it prior to the time that you indicated, never having discussed it with anyone in the White House, outside of the White House, legal counsel, advisors, etc. I just wanted to make sure. With that, I yield to the ranking member.
Well, I thank the chairwoman. As we know, under congressional authority, it's the chair of the Ways and Means Committee and the jurisdiction of the Ways and Means Committee over that division of Treasury that we call the IRS. I think it would be appropriate to submit for the record the Washington Post story in question here. I don't know if that was been previously done, but it's the Jeff Stein, Josh Dazzi story from the Washington Post. This posted last night at 6:46 p.m. entitled "Confidential Draft IRS Memo Says Tax Returns Must Be Given to Congress Unless President Invokes Executive Privilege." And I ask
without objection, such is the order.
Thank you. To that end, in my reading of the story, this was a draft memo. It was stamped draft. It has no one that is written to, nor an author. And so I just want to ask you, you stated that you'd not seen the memo until this day. Do you mean you'd not heard of this or seen the memo until you read the news story? Is that what you...
Yeah, I mean, to the best of my recollection, okay, I don't ever recall seeing this memo. Anybody, the first I ever heard of this was when we got a Washington Post inquiry. Now, let me just also comment of what I've been briefed on very quickly on this is this issue is different than the legal analysis that we've done. Now, of course, we will look at it and take it into account and make sure, but let me assure you, there's no smoking gun here. We did a very thorough legal analysis with the Department of Justice that, again, if this goes to the courts will decide and determine. Okay. I, for one, think this is an unprecedented issue of turning over any individual's tax return, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, and I would hope, we all hope, that we get to the right conclusion on what the right law is here.
So in this regard, just to make sure the record is clear, have you seen the memo outlined in the Washington Post story?
Someone handed it to me on the way up here where they took it off of the Washington Post. So not that we received it independently.
Okay.
And again, to the best of my knowledge and the people we've inquired, we have not received, nobody in the senior leadership had seen this before. So could be somebody in Treasury somewhere or another. Again, from what I've been told, I don't believe this is really that relevant to the legal analysis that we've done. But this is the first we're hearing of.
Well, thank you, and thank you for correcting the record. The final question I had, and I've asked unanimous consent to submit for the record my letter to the director of FinCEN, dated May 6th, asking for an additional briefing and data to support the legislation commonly called beneficial ownership here on Capitol Hill. I submit this for the record because I've not received a response back from FinCEN from my letter dated May 6th. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection, such is the order.
And I raise this to you, Mr. Secretary. The director of FinCEN has yet to provide any data to justify the position to have a massive new collection of the ownership data of small businesses across America. I raise it to you because I know you can and will be responsive. I raise it to you because one of your reports has not been responsive. The briefing I received from Director Blanco and his team was quite frankly insulting. It was anecdotal stories, no data in order to justify a substantial change in public policy. It would be infuriating under a Democrat administration for me to receive a briefing like that. It is even more infuriating when it's a Republican administration not giving Republicans on the Hill any sort of decency of data. Nor do I actually think when it comes to security matters that partisan question should come into play. But it's been one of the more infuriating issues I've had to deal with.
You have my personal assurance we will be responsive to you on a timely basis and make sure you have the data so whatever your opinions are justified by data.
Thank you.
I share your data view.
Thank you. And I appreciate it. And with that, I yield back.
I would also like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from One Campaign, the Bank Information Center, the International Trade Union Federation, and several senior fellows from the Center for Global Development that echoes concerns I expressed last month's hearing. The letter raises questions about the transfer of concessional and grant resources from the World Bank Group's International Development Association, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to thank Secretary Mnuchin for returning to the committee and for his time today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions to the chair, which will be forwarded to the Secretary for his response. I ask the Secretary to please respond as promptly as you're able. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We are going over now to the House Homeland Security hearing where McAllen is testifying in
visas, humanitarian visas, all kind of relief. I think you have a backlog of 2.3 million cases last year. We've not seen this kind of backlog since right after 9/11 when the new security measures were put in place. Yet you want to transfer $207 million. Again, you have an obligation to do something and you're cutting your request for funding while telling this committee you need more resources to deal with the crisis. Clearly, citizenship and visas are part of that crisis. Can you tell us how you justify that or what your plans are for getting rid of this backlog?
So not familiar with the specific cut you're referencing, Congresswoman, but I can tell you that CIS does have a backlog but is working very hard on its processing. They naturalized more people last year than any year prior. It's a record level of efforts in their naturalization. We are working on immigrant visas across the board, on the H-1B, H-2A program. So I know we have a growing backlog in asylum cases, which is driven by this flow at the border. But I think they're working very hard as a fee-funded agency to keep up with the rest of the naturalization process, et cetera.
It is fee-funded. In fact, it's $700, which is very expensive. Many people can't afford that fee who would like to move into different channels, get different visas, perhaps get citizenship. So with that kind of fee and this kind of cut, I'm not sure that you're kind of balancing priorities there or how the resources will work best.
I know the fees are assigned based on the cost for administering each program and each application. I'll take a look at the cut issue that you're referencing.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ratliff.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Acting Secretary, thank you for being here and testifying on the President's FY20 budget request for DHS. As you know, President Trump has set an agenda that I believe does prioritize the safety and security of the American people, an agenda that includes a robust border security operation, strong cybersecurity protections, both for our networks and for our critical infrastructure, and a comprehensive strategy to prevent potential terrorists from ever setting foot on American soil. But as you have already talked about today, unfortunately, we are facing a dire humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border. Border agents in my home state of Texas have provided statistics that I just saw yesterday indicating that they're averaging 229 migrant apprehensions per hour, or 5,500 per day, more than 38,000 per week, and on pace this month to eclipse more than 150,000 illegal migrant apprehensions. Obviously, one of the main reasons, as you have talked about, for this incredible surge in terms of numbers are our asylum laws. That have put your department in a bind because your folks can't deliver legal consequences to many of the illegal migrants that are apprehended at the border because they're either minors or they are with family units that have arrived with minors. And because of the legal precedent set forth under the Flores settlement, because that precedent under Flores says that unaccompanied minors and members of a family unit from non-contiguous countries have to be released in the United States after 20 days to await immigration proceedings. We talked about that problem, and I realized that one solution to that problem is for Congress to address it. Congress absolutely can do that, absolutely should do that, and I'm here to tell you that I don't think Congress will do that. I say that because some, not all of my colleagues on the other side, like the problem better than they like the solution. They like to stand up before the American people and say that this president and this administration are separating children from their families because of inhumane reasons, rather than honestly telling them that they're doing so because under the Flores settlement, the law requires that you either separate the children or release the entire family in total disregard for immigration laws as Congress passed them. So I'm not waiting on a solution from Congress anytime soon. My question for you, Mr. Secretary, is the other possibility is for DHS to address it administratively. Last fall, DHS and HHS proposed new regulations that would effectively terminate the Flores settlement agreement and replace it with formal regulations governing the apprehension, processing, care, custody, and release of minor children. What's the status of those regulations?
Thank you for asking about that aspect, and we're aggressively working on finalizing the Flores rule. What it would do is codify the key elements of that settlement for over 20 years ago in terms of the care of children in federal custody, but it would also allow us to maintain custody of families together pending their immigration proceedings. We got over 100,000 comments on that rule. They have to be responded to issue a final rule. That's going to be coming up in the coming weeks and months. It's going to be released and will hopefully allow us to address that part of this issue.
So what you're telling me, Mr. Secretary, is that notwithstanding Congress not willing to act on this issue, the Department of Homeland Security is attempting to address this crisis at the border through these proposed regulations.
That is one of the many dynamic actions we're taking to try to address this crisis, yes.
Thank you. Another problem that we need to address, or part of what relates to this issue is the low threshold screening standards for migrants to claim asylum. If a migrant successfully asserts credible fear, there is a good chance they're likely going to remain in the United States. And so accordingly, what your folks are seeing, I know, are asylum applicants who are very well coached by coyotes and by immigration advocates and others. My question to you is, does this budget provide appropriate funding to ensure that DHS is conducting regular fraud risk assessments as it relates to affirmative asylum application process? And generally, can you address what DHS is trying to do to combat asylum fraud and abuse?
Thank you for those two questions, Congressman. You've highlighted one of the key drivers of this crisis. It's the gap between the initial credible fear standard in the asylum proceeding and the ultimate asylum standard adjudicated by an immigration judge. What we're seeing is 85 to 90% of people meeting that initial bar, a possibility of proving an asylum case, and only 10 to 15% of Central Americans meeting the actual asylum standard at the end of an immigration proceeding. That allows people to remain in the U.S. indefinitely, pending an immigration proceeding, and creates a significant pull factor that we're grappling with. You asked how we're addressing that with fraud prevention. First of all, since I became acting secretary, we've deployed over 100 HSI agents to the border with forensic interview skills to talk to families crossing the border, to identify whether there's a family relationship first and foremost. So these are targeted based on concerns of fraud to begin with. And then to look at whether what they're presenting to border agents is accurate. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, we have a fraud detection and national security unit at CIS that we now have directed them to really engage on the asylum piece of this and to make sure we're following through effectively. And ideally, we need to get proceedings completed. That's the central problem we have right now, is we're not getting results from immigration courts that can be effectuated because people are not in custody, and that means that ICE is left to go out into communities to pick people up when it could be much more efficiently done as they arrive at the border. Thank you for asking that question and allowing us to talk more about the problem.
I appreciate your response, Mr. Secretary. My time's expired. I yield back.
Gentleman's time.
First, let me start by correcting the record. The separation of children and families didn't happen because it was required. That is not why the president did it. This administration is on record in saying they did this to deter people from coming. And so to knowingly separate children and families by prosecuting parents that was going to result in the separation and then mentally harm children, that's despicable. And that is why people believe that what this administration is doing is intentional. It's a belief based on all the lies that members of Congress have been told, all the lies that have been out in the public, and from what has been going out into the public. Let me start. Mr. Secretary, is there a written policy on the Remain in Mexico policy?
There's a statutory provision. There is
that
guidance
policy
to the
in
field.
writing?
Yes.
Can you provide us that copy?
I believe we already have provided to Congress, but
If you could give it to me, that would be fantastic.
Mr. Chairman, just a second, just provide the copy of the policy. That's all she asking for.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Secretary, you are familiar with that policy, correct?
I am.
And under that policy, there are certain groups of people that are not eligible to be returned to Mexico. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and under that group, unaccompanied minors, one of them?
Correct.
Cubans?
Correct.
Mexicans?
Correct.
Vulnerable people?
Correct.
Sick, elderly?
That's discretionary, but those are categories to be considered.
LGBT?
Discretionary, but categories to be considered.
Pregnant women?
Same.
Okay, let me tell you, Mr. Secretary, I either was lied to at the border or something has changed. When I was at the border in April, I specifically spoke to Officer Blanchard with Border Patrol. He told me he was from D.C., and he told me he wrote this policy. And he told me that pregnant women were excluded and not to be sent at the border. You come in and you talk about how you want to help protect children and they're going through this dangerous journey and keeping them safe. Well, guess what? This administration is putting pregnant women in danger. Do you know how dangerous it is to be sent to Juarez, Mexico? Do you?
I'm familiar with Juarez, Mexico, and what the government.
Well, let me tell you, Mr. Secretary, as a member of Congress, this is how dangerous it is. I can't go there without getting permission. That's how dangerous it is. Then, if you go to the State Department's website, and we got a little copy of it here for you, it says Mexico, violent crimes such as homicide, kidnapping, carjacking. Oh, but then if you go to the State Department's specific website on Juarez, it asks you to reconsider your travel. So it is so dangerous to travel to Juarez that the State Department is telling people to reconsider travel because of violent crime and gang activities are widespread. U.S. government employees, and I quote, are required to retain prior approval to even go into the downtown area. But this is where you're sending pregnant women back into Mexico while they await their asylum. Do you realize that this is happening?
So the Migrant Protection Protocol.
Do you realize that pregnant women are being sent back to dangerous parts of countries that our own country tells people not to go to reconsider their travel?
So,
do you realize that's happening? That's a yes or no.
So under the Migrant Protection Protocols, we are asking people to wait in Mexico for their immigration hearing.
Okay, so I'm going to reclaim my time because this is what the American people need to know. I was lied to at the border, and this is why there is no credibility with this administration. That is why there's no credibility. All right, let me move on for a moment. The 72-hour rule. Are you familiar with the 72-hour rule?
Which one?
Well, the one that basically says that within 72 hours, children need to be processed and turned over.
You're talking about the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act rule for unaccompanied children?
Yes, a 72-hour rule, sir. Do you know how disturbing it is when the largest law enforcement agency in this country is not even following the law? Well, it's disturbing. You're not following the 72-hour rule, as we know, because you just had a 16-year-old child die that was being held for a week. People are being turned away at the border when they present themselves at the ports of entry. How do I know? I've been there. You have agents who are treating people like animals and in person telling them how terrible they are. How do I know? I've been there firsthand. We just saw the text messages. And an agent then hits a migrant? Is this how to be treating people who are escaping violence? Of course not. So why do people think this administration is intentionally harming children? Well, let's just look at the facts. Look at all the lies. Look at the harm done to children and their mental health. Look at the children that are dying under your watch. And you just said, Mr. Secretary, you are proud of your record. That is despicable to say. You should not be proud of a record of having 5 children die under your watch. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, could I respond to any of that last segment?
I think that lady made her own statement. Chair, I recognize the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I have 5 minutes, but I'll yield you some time to respond to what Ms. Berrigan said.
The one important part of what that last segment was that the 72-hour rule, where we try to transfer children to HHS custody within 3 days of their arrival, that's a critical protection for children. That's why this administration has asked for $3 billion additional dollars for HHS to provide additional bed space so that we can transfer unaccompanied children in a timely fashion. It's a critical part of our supplemental request, and we would appreciate if Congress would consider it.
Thank you. And members, as you know, I'm from a border state, from Arizona. I've been to the border. I've also been to a facility where they shelter unaccompanied children. I know that there's a crisis. Everybody in Arizona, everybody in the nation, it seems like, knows there's a crisis at the border. And it's not only to our security, but it is a humanitarian crisis. When I had the previous secretary here, she said girls as young as 11 years old were getting pregnancy tests because of what the cartels do and what happens on this long journey. And instead of blaming the United States, when I've seen these Border Patrol agents help these children, they go out of their way to help children, help families. They are good people. Wouldn't you say that it is actually the cartels that are encouraging these people to travel thousands of miles to exploit our loose immigration laws and asylum laws and are charging them, what, $6,000 a child? Wouldn't you say we should place the blame on them instead?
Absolutely agree, Congresswoman. It's a $3 billion industry now for the most violent criminal organizations in our hemisphere. They're exploiting vulnerable people from Central America to our border, and it's unacceptable.
And I agree, Mr. Chairman and members, it is totally unacceptable. And that is why I am so supportive and appreciate everything the President has done to try to mitigate this crisis, not only a security crisis to our nation, but also a humanitarian crisis for the migrants themselves. I mean, he has tried every which way to do what he can, and I appreciate that so much. And that's why I will support this extra funding, because it's very obvious to me that it's needed. It's needed to help these migrants, to help with the security. We also need to pass good immigration laws. And so last year, I co-sponsored and voted for what I thought was a compromise that we could actually get something done. And that was, we not only had a bill that would have helped secure the border, it would have changed some of our asylum laws, but it also would have given DACA recipients legal status. I just came from Judiciary Committee. They're trying to push through a bill, the DREAMer Act bill. But unfortunately, in that bill, it has no age limits. It allows people that have crimes. It allows people that fraudulently fill out their application to be here. And so, to me, that's a big concern. I want to switch, because I only have a minute, 24 seconds left. And that is on a committee hearing we had yesterday. It's a subcommittee hearing, and there was concern by a number of members that DHS employees were being diverted to the border on a voluntary basis to help with the crisis at our border. And so I was told by staff today, just so that we correct what happened yesterday with some of the words, is that no TSO officers, no transportation security officers that are on the front line of our airports are actually being diverted or deployed to the border right now. And so I guess my question is, would this money that you're asking for actually help so that we don't have to divert people from other security details to the border?
It would. It would help us with our partnership with DOD. It would help us with our law enforcement surge assets that are going to the border, including TSA Federal Air Marshals that are part of our Viper teams that are mobile in the first place and that have deployed to the border to help us. But it will also support volunteers from across the department. Just like we respond to a natural disaster or storm, we've asked for volunteers to come help us care for people in our custody, let our agents get back to our border security mission, help them process more efficiently. One thing I didn't get to explain on the medical side is that every day we're taking 65 people to the hospital. That means we have agents and officers on hospital watch duty 24/7 all across that border. About 10 of those a day are admitted to the hospital and receive tremendous medical care from border communities that are stressed by this situation as well. So any additional support from volunteers will help, and being able to fund that support will help us manage the crisis. I'd still like to focus on addressing it and preventing it, starting in Central America, but yes, we need help to manage it, and that's the funding request we've made.
Thank you, and I just want to add that I do greatly appreciate the Border Patrol officers, all of our law enforcement officers in DHS. The ones that I have met are really working hard to protect our nation and to help these migrants. So thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, in your meeting with the ranking member and myself yesterday, you told us that TSOs were being deployed to the border.
That's why I added that while they haven't yet been deployed, we have requested volunteers that could include TSOs to help deploy and support the mission on the border.
So they will be?
That's a potential, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rose.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service to this country across multiple administrations. I do believe in your heart you want to put the country first. So I want to first of all talk about fentanyl. It's coming from China, and it's killing kids in virtually all of our districts. China's the largest producer of illicit fentanyl. Recently, there's been a bipartisan bill, bicameral as well, that called the Fentanyl Sanctions Act, proposed to hold China's feet to the fire. And part and parcel of this is the establishment of a federal commission which will focus on developing a consensus and a strategic approach to address illicit fentanyl. Very basic question. Would you be a supporter of Homeland Security participating on the commission and in this whole of government approach to address fentanyl?
So addressing the scourge of fentanyl is one of the department's top priorities on the counter-narcotics side. And so I'd certainly like to talk with you about that and see how we could be a participant in that effort.
Do you have any other updates you'd like to give on your perception of the fentanyl issue right now?
I've got maybe 3 or 4. I'll try to do it quickly because I know you have limited time. First of all, the investments in 2019 that will allow us to transform how we do scanning of trucks and vehicles crossing our southern border will make a huge impact on our ability to detect synthetic opioids like fentanyl and all narcotics. We're also deploying this equipment in mail facilities and express consignment out at the JFK mail facility, for instance, where most of the fentanyl that's in mail packages, hiding in that huge mass of consumer goods that's coming across from China. We're able to detect that better with that equipment. We're also working with U.S. Postal Inspection Service and HSI to take targeted shipments that we find with 25 grams of fentanyl and follow that into where the pill presses are and the distributors. We've had a lot of successes this last year, more than doubled our fentanyl seizures at our mail facility. So it's a tremendous operational priority for us, both in interdiction and investigation. And the technology investments we received in 2019 are going to make a huge impact.
Thank you. So moving on to counterterrorism. I represent a district in New York City, #1 terrorist threat. The country, definitely, potentially the world at large. It's been raised already here that you and the administration with your support, has proposed pretty significant cuts to whether it's UASI, transportation security, so on and so forth. $587 million in cuts in total for Homeland Security grants to places that need them for counterterror spending. New York City particularly, you used a term that I found interesting earlier, shared responsibility. Your belief, correct me if I'm wrong, is that municipalities and states need to start doing more. Is that correct? So are you of the opinion that then the NYPD is not doing enough right now, is not shouldering the burden enough right now? Because these cuts are significant. I believe these cuts, it's not a scalpel, this is a hatchet. And I have to figure out what to say to them.
Right.
And it being, from a bipartisan, country-first perspective, what do I tell them?
Well, first of all, you can tell Commissioner O'Neill that he's among our top partners in law enforcement all over the country, and that NYPD is the most effective counterterrorism force in a state and local police level that I'm aware of. So please don't suggest that they're not doing enough. In terms of grant investments at a municipal level, especially our major cities that could be targets, that does have to be a shared federal, state, and local responsibility.
But monetarily, you're saying that they need to do more. New York City, New York State, other major urban areas that are the primary threats to counterterror, you're saying that they are not doing enough right now.
No, I'm saying that to sustain funding at the prior grant levels, and remember, we're working within a top-line budget. Nobody wants to make cuts to security programs ever. You're trying to balance across all of your requirements as a department and as an administration when you submit the budget. So I just want to emphasize that.
And is it a correct reading then of the budget to say that you have deemed the border a greater priority than counterterror right now?
So I think there are multiple priorities. The border is a significant priority.
You're increasing funding for one.
Correct.
And decreasing funding for the other.
Correct. Yeah.
Logical conclusion from that is that the border is a greater threat to this country right now than terrorism.
So, not necessarily, but you just noted the fentanyl risks, right? That's coming across the southern border. That's the primary
ports of
vector,
entry,
and
yes.
it's having impact on our communities every single day. So it's a balance between all of those efforts. I think the idea on the grant.
And that is going to do it for us today at Fox 29's News Now. Be sure to catch us again tomorrow, same time, same place, and be sure to follow Fox 29 on the fox29.com site and mobile app, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and have a great day.